Most marketing fails not because people aren't optimizing enough, but because they're over-optimizing their marketing efforts or ad campaigns.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
This is going to be especially true if you're selling a higher value product or service, whether you work in the D2C space or B2B. But even for lower value items, what you have to remember is most markets these days are incredibly saturated and consumer trust year on year is plummeting, and it's currently lower than ever. What that means is that people need to have more exposure to brands than ever before, and to be able to consume more content from brands before they feel enough trust to actually make a purchase decision. Let's look at an example I see all the time in the B2B space. A company might be running ads on a platform like Meta or LinkedIn and getting really great engagement on those ads, really good view rates of the videos, but the ads just aren't showing any conversions. However, the company is generating leads and sales, which according to their CRM are coming from organic sources or direct traffic. So the company looks at the ad platforms, assumes the ads aren't working, and ends up turning them off or reducing the budget or just constantly changing creatives, trying to find something that is actually getting conversions. And this is mistake number one. Most companies only look at the quantitative data and not the qualitative data. So the quantitative data is your metrics that you're seeing within the ad accounts, right? Your cost per click, your cost per lead, those numbers that you can easily count. The qualitative metrics, on the other hand, are going to be slightly harder to come by. This might be through user-reported attribution and manually looking through reports. It might be having one-on-one interviews with customers to find out how they actually heard about your brand and the reason they bought. We actually worked with a customer recently who, according to their CRM, was getting about 80% of their sales from organic traffic. So they switched off all of their ads, focused fully on organic, and then their leads and sales suddenly dropped off a cliff. And it was only afterwards, once we dug into this and started conducting interviews with their buyers, that we found people were actually hearing about them because colleagues had shared content with them that they'd seen in ad campaigns running on LinkedIn or other platforms because the content was so valuable. What was then happening is somebody else in their team who was making the buying decision was then going onto Google to search for that brand. So their CRM said it was coming from Google, but actually that initial touch point had happened in an ad and this brand had no idea. This also happens in D2C, where someone might see an ad for something and then they share it with their partner. Their partner then goes on to Google later to buy that product themselves. So this is where it becomes really, really important to make sure that you're not just optimizing campaign blindly based on the metrics you can see within your ad account, and instead you take the time to analyze the data, to speak to your customers, to blend data from multiple sources, and to really think about just the way that people buy. Another mistake I see businesses making are over-optimizing for things like keywords on their search campaign to try and go after the highest intent. But what you'll often see happen here is when they're bidding on higher intent, more exact match keywords, you're generally going to be paying a higher cost per click. And depending on your own price point, where you fit in the market and what the average cost per clicks are, you could be pricing yourself out of the market. There are some industries, for example, that have cost per clicks of upwards of £30 or £40 or dollars. And if you're up against big competitors in that space and have a lower average order value or contract value than your competitors, you're going to find it extremely difficult to compete at that level. So instead of just doing the obvious thing that people might tell you to do and only targeting high intent keywords and optimizing toward those, sometimes you might even want to have a look at things that don't actually initially make sense on the surface. Things like going after low intent informational searches that actually signal some form of buyer intent there, but maybe for people earlier on in the buyer journey. These can sometimes work very well because your competitors just aren't thinking about them, and because they're informational searches, they can attract a very low cost per click. And if we look at an example here, You might have a very low cost per click keyword that has a very low conversion rate. But when you compare it to a very high cost per click keyword with a slightly higher conversion rate, because you've still got competitors in the space, what you'll actually see is that we can potentially be making more profit and higher returns from those lower intent searches. This is why it's really important to not get put into a box and just trying to do everything that your competitors are doing. Because whilst on the surface it might look like your competitors are wildly successful, you have no idea whether or not their ad campaigns are profitable, for one, but also all of the other variables and factors that might be going into making that campaign work. Instead, you want to focus on the customer journey and how you can most effectively get in front of your target audience. Now, to be clear here, this doesn't mean you should just throw your metrics out the window, because of course it's still important to have some clear goals and KPIs to work toward. But what it does mean is that you need to have a more holistic view of your marketing and also look at the long-term bigger picture, factoring in things like the average buying cycle of your customers. If you know that customers are going to take 6 to 7 months to buy a product from you, don't measure your marketing in small increments of weeks or months, because it's just not realistic or possible. Now, of course, this doesn't mean you just need to sit and hope for the best. There are still lots of metrics you can track while you're testing campaigns to see if something is actually showing signs of life and whether it's worth staying the course or switching. So in this video coming up next, I'm going to be walking you through some of the key marketing metrics you need to be tracking. I'll see you there.